I'd like to welcome you back. We're going to be continuing today with our study of Daniel. We are not going to be covering over chapter 10. We're just going to be going into chapter 11. And so let's get this up here on the screen. There we go. Part 3, Finding Visions and Sifting for Symbols in the Book of Daniel. Uh, I always like the Book of Daniel. It's one of those books that to me is somewhat challenging, but really important for us to know and learn. I think it gives us a lot of beginning to understanding what it is that God has in store. Now, there's a lot of, when you get out and look at people's thoughts about Daniel 11, there's a lot of different ideas about this chapter. And I'm not going to tell you that my idea is the absolute only correct idea. It's after sifting through many things, after reading many prophecies in the scriptures, trying to put everything together the best as that I can. It's what I've come to conclude is most likely the closest uh, and best interpretation. We're not going to actually um, decipher or go through piece by piece all of chapter 11. We're going to focus on two pieces of it predominantly. And so, without further ado, there is one verse I do want to touch on from Daniel 10 because I think it's important in the storyline when you're going through Daniel 8, the first passage we went through, and all the events that happened around Greece and Media and Persia, and the war at Plataea, which took place in 479, a very important date, and the beginning of our date when we begin to count towards the cleaning of the temple. Um, Chapter 9, when he gets into the 70 weeks, which again kind of covers a very similar period of time, more symbolically, more generically, in very few verses. And then in chapter 10, Daniel's praying about this and wanting to know more understanding, and God sends his angel to give him some discernment. And in Daniel 10, chapter 10, verse 14, we have this verse right in about the middle of the chapter that I think is really important. Now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days. For yet the vision is for many days. And of course, we look at this passage and we say, well, when it says latter days, what time period is he speaking of? And of course, my own opinion is that he's not actually speaking about the end of the world, just before his second coming, just before the millennium, but rather, I think that, like chapter 8 and chapter 9, the real focus here for Daniel is the coming of the Messiah and giving hope to God's people for the coming of the Messiah. I think things are rolling up and getting closer to that date. Of course, there's still several hundred years between Daniel and the Christ coming, but I think God is laying out what's going to befall God's people, the ancient covenant house of Israel. And so I think that's what this is about. And I think this whole story that we're going to be reading today in chapter 11 all points to, again, the battle there in the Middle East, what was going to be happening around God's people, some major players in that in those events, and the end players at the period of Christ himself's coming. And so, starting in chapter 11, verse 1, also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. And a mighty king shall stand up, that shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided towards the 4 kingdoms of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others besides those. And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him, and have dominion, and his dominion shall be a great dominion. And so this is the beginning of our story. Daniel's giving us to understand that where he is, Darius of the Medes is governing. And during this period of time, we're going to see 3 kings show up, and then a 4th one, which will be far richer, far greater in certain characteristics, certain aspects. But one of the big things is this 4th king is going to be the clincher between the war between the Medes and the Persians and Greece. And so that's where we can find the point in here where we can begin to unravel this mystery that we have in this chapter. And it says when the Darius, or when these kings in Persia, when the 4th one comes along and comes against Greece, that's going to be the momentous point when the battle changes. Now Greece is going to be the major player on the scene. They're going to take over. But even though a great and mighty king will stand up in Greece, it won't last long. And his kingdom will be divided up between 4, and none of those 4 will be his personal posterity, his children, or his descendants. They will actually be other people. But it'll be divided up, and there's a couple of these kingdoms that are going to be stronger than the rest. And the important part here is it's going to be the king of the south and the king of the north. And this is important because as we go through the rest of this prophecy, these are not speaking of kings per se, but rather it's speaking of these kingdoms and the progression of kings that will be in these kingdoms. And so that's something that's going to be important to watch as we're reading through this. So to start off in this chapter, we have to figure out in what time period this is taking place. It tells us in chapter 10 that this is the 3rd year of King Cyrus. Yet in the first verse of chapter 11, it says it's the 1st year of Darius. So which is it? Or is it both? If we go back to the first verse of chapter 9, we see that Darius wasn't a king in the common sense of the word king, as his kingdom was given to him seemingly by another with more power. And as best as we can figure out from the ancient writings, it was given to him by none other than King Cyrus of the Persians. We can also gather that more than likely Darius only reigned about 2 to 3 years in this period when he was replaced as king of Babylon by Cyrus himself. So basically what you had was a co-regency, with Cyrus being top dog, number 1, and Darius serving as a regional king. This actually wasn't an odd practice for King Cyrus. He was actually very generous when he took other kingdoms. It was not an uncommon practice for him to leave the kings of those nations alive and even sometimes in power. And according to the story, we'll get into that. Unlike the question of Belshazzar, until modern times there really wasn't much controversy over the identification of Darius the Mede. 2 ancient writers had spoken of Darius that ruled before Cyrus the Great, who was distinct from Darius Hystaspes, the 3rd king after Cyrus, the father of Xerxes. The first was Berosus, a Babylonian historian who lived in the 3rd century BC. His works, though widely known in the ancient world, now survive only in quotes by other authors. In the Armenian translation of the Chronicles of Eusebius, he is quoted to refer to a King Darius who held power before Cyrus the Great. The Chaldean Chronicles, Book 11. Second was a Greek grammarian named Harpocration, who lived in the 2nd century A.D. In a lexicon he wrote on 10 Greek orators, he defined the meaning of the word Darie, a Persian coin. He wrote, Daries are not named, as most suppose, after Darius, the father of Xerxes, but after a certain other more ancient king. And so here you have the beginning of some of the history coming into who this Darius the Mede is. He actually was reigning supposedly in the kingdom of the Medes for a time, till Cyrus became powerful and began to take over. Cyrus came up and basically took possession of the territory of the Medes. Darius, we're going to find another name for him here in just a moment, but Darius supposedly didn't have any offspring, and so he says, okay, I'm going to give you my daughter, and I'm going to give you the whole kingdom of the Medes. And Cyrus said, great, I'm going to make you king over the Babylonian province. Take care of it for me. And so in addition to this, the Greek historian Xenophon, who served as a mercenary in the Persian army a century after Cyrus the Great, wrote a work called the Cyclopedia, or the Education of Cyrus. This work told of a king of the Medes named Astyages, who is the grandfather of Cyrus the Great. Xenophon claimed that Astyages died. He was succeeded by his son Cyaxares II. At this time, a confederacy existed between Media and Persia, with Persia the inferior partner in the relationship. He claimed that Cyrus took Babylon for the confederacy while Babylon was feasting. After taking Babylon, Cyrus went to Cyaxares II, telling him that he had prepared a place for him in Babylon. Cyaxares II, having no male heir, then gave Cyrus his daughter as wife, and all Media as dowry. The Greek playwright Aeschylus gave support to this view. And so we can see kind of how this is playing out according to some of the ancient documents that have remained and talk about Darius. It says, he considered Cyrus the Great the third successor to two Median kings that preceded him. For centuries, this led many to conclude that Cyaxares II was the same king Daniel called Darius the Mede. Josephus wrote, Babylon was taken by Darius, and when he and his kinsman Cyrus had put an end to the dominion of the Babylonians, he was 62 years old, and he was the son of Astyages, and had another name among the Greeks. Also, the historian Jerome wrote in his commentary on Daniel, wrote that Cyrus the Great succeeded his maternal grandfather, Astyages, and reigned over the Medes and Persians along with his uncle, Darius, whom the Greeks called Cyaxares. And so there you can see some of the historical documents behind it. And so we have really Darius the Mede reigning prior to Cyrus the Great, but Cyrus the Great taking over the territory of the Medes, conquering Babylon. And as the passage tells us, there's going to be three kings coming after Darius the Mede, because technically Darius began before Cyrus. And so you have Cyrus the Great, you have Cambyses, and you have Darius the First. And then you have this fourth king, Xerxes the first. And it says, there shall stand up yet three kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than they all. And so Xerxes really is the guy that comes into play here that becomes important to us. And so we have to ask ourselves, who is this Xerxes and why is he important? So what do we know about Xerxes? And here's just a small excerpt out of the Wikipedia article on Xerxes the First. This is what it says. Darius died while in the process of preparing a second army to invade the Greek mainland, leaving to his son the task of punishing the Athenians, the Naxians, and the Eretrians from the interference in the Ionian revolt, the burning of Sardis, and their victory over the Persians at Marathon. From 483 BC, Xerxes prepared his expedition. The Xerxes Canal was dug through the isthmus of the peninsula of Mount Athos. Provisions were stored in the stations on the road through Thrace, and two pontoon bridges, later known as Xerxes pontoon bridges, were built across the Hellespont. Soldiers of many nationalities served in the armies of Xerxes, from all over his multi-ethnic, massive Eurasian-sized empire and beyond, including the Syrians, Phoenicians, Babylonians, Egyptians, Jews, Macedonians, European, Thracians, Paeonians, Achaeans, Greeks, Ionians, Aegean islanders, Aeolians, Greeks from Pontus, Colchians, Indians, and many more. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, Xerxes' first attempt to bridge the Hellespont ended in failure when a storm destroyed the flax and papyrus cables of the bridges. In retaliation, Xerxes ordered the Hellespont, the strait itself, whipped 300 times and had fetters thrown into the water. Xerxes' second attempt to bridge the Hellespont was successful. The Carthaginian invasion of Sicily deprived Greece of the support of the powerful monarchs of the Syracuse and Agentium. Ancient sources assume Xerxes was responsible. Modern scholarship is skeptical. Many smaller Greek states, moreover, took the side of the Persians, especially Thessaly, Thebes, and Argos. Xerxes was victorious during the initial battles. And so the passage in Daniel tells us that this fourth king is going to rile up his people against the Greeks. And this is what this story is telling us from Wikipedia. He collected up people from all over his nation, made this massive army, and began marching to Greece. And of course, this had to have cost an exorbitant amount of money to be able to accomplish this. Let's continue. Xerxes set out in the spring of 480 BC from Sardis with a fleet and army which Herodotus esteemed was roughly 1 million strong, along with 10,000 elite warriors named the Immortals. More recent estimates place the Persian force at around 60,000 combatants. According to Herodotus, fearing that the Greeks might attack the bridge across the Hellespont and trap his army in Europe, Xerxes decided to retreat back to Asia, taking the greater part of his army with him. Another cause of the retreat might have been that the continued unrest in Babylon, a key province of the empire, required the king's personal attention. He left behind a contingent in Greece to finish the campaign under Mardonius, who, according to Herodotus, had suggested the retreat in the first place. This force was defeated the following year at, where? Plataea, by the combined forces of the Greek city-states, ending the Persian offensive on Greece for good. You have the pinnacle of time here. As we talked about in chapter 8 of Daniel when we were reading it, the Medes and Persians came up, met the Greeks in Plataea, very, very decisive battle in 479, and the Persians and the Medes were turned back. And so all of this effort, money, to conquer Greece, and they're lost. And of course we have a special person rising up in this moment. A mighty king shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And that began just right around that period of time, a little after the Battle of Plataea. We have Alexander the Great coming in. And as you can see on the map here, basically he conquers all of the territories of the Medes and the Persians, gaining probably some territory on there in very, very, very short time. But can't get as far as he was hoping to. He was actually hoping to get farther east into India and whatnot. Eventually, though, his own soldiers rebel on him. He backtracks, comes back around here, around the Babylonian city of Babylon, and dies. And that's the end of Alexander the Great and his conquering. But we know that the Grecian area that they now controlled was very vast. But at Alexander's death, of course, he has no offspring, children that are of age to become rulers. And so his kingdom basically gets divided up between four of his main commanders. You have this area down here, the darker green, in Egypt, which becomes under the charge of Ptolemy. This is going to be the kingdom of the south predominantly in our story. You have the Seleucian kingdom, this kind of mint green over on the east side, which is the kingdom of the north. These are the two kingdoms that most matter to the Middle Eastern area of Israel, as you can see on the map right here by where it says Tyre. Right in here is Israel, the northern kingdoms, the southern kingdom of Israel. Of course, we know that both of them were destroyed by Babylon, but under Nehemiah, they came back and rebuilt Jerusalem and the temple. But we know that this period of time is going to be short-lived. And so we have the two upper areas, the smaller areas here, the tan and the pink in Macedonia, under two other of Alexander the Great's commanders. His kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided towards the four winds of heaven. So you have this northern kingdom, you have the southern kingdom, and you have the other two kingdoms here, dividing up the Grecian area. And the rest of our story from here on out is going to involve these two kingdoms. Egypt, the Ptolemy kingdoms, and it's going to start out with Ptolemy number 1, and it's going to go through a whole slew of Ptolemies. That was a title that was used from that point out. And we have the Seleucus kingdom over on the northeast side here. That is going to be the kingdom to the north. And so at this point, we're just going to continue reading this story. I'm not going to talk a lot about all these individual pieces. We're going to jump down probably close to verses 25 to 29. We're going to pick up our story more in depth again. So for the moment, we're just going to read the story. And it says in verse 6 to 8, "And in the end of the years they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm. But she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that brought her, and he that strengthened her in these times. But out of the branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail, and shall also carry captives into Egypt their gods, with their princes, and with their precious vessels of silver and gold. And he shall continue more years than the king of the north." Very important. And this is a list, basically, of the two sets of rulers. On the left-hand side, you have the Ptolemies. Ptolemy first. This is the first king of the south, Soter, and it's going to go through one by one the Ptolemies, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It skips 7. He wasn't old enough to reign and ended up missing out. Ptolemy 8, Ptolemy, and then you had a Cleopatra in here, and on the Seleucidas side, or the eastern side under the Syria area, you have the Seleucids, and you have the Seleucids, and you have the Antiochus, and you have them going back and forth. These are the basic leadership that will be playing out during these next few verses that we're reading, starting roughly after the time of Alexander the Great, and going on just a generation or two before Christ himself. And so, verse 9, "So the king of the south shall come into his kingdom, and shall return into his own land. But his son shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces. And one shall certainly come and overflow, and pass through. Then shall he return, and be stirred up even to his fortress. And the king of the south shall be moved with cholera, and shall come forth and fight with him, even the king of the north. And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. And when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it. For the king of the north shall return, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount, and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his will, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, the upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her. But she shall not stand on his side, neither be for him. After this shall he turn his face to the isles, and shall take many, a prince for his own behalf, shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease, without his own reproach. He shall cause it to turn upon him. Then he shall turn his face towards the fort of his own land. But he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes, in the glory of the kingdom. But within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. And in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom. But he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. And with the arm of a flood shall they be overthrown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. He shall enter peaceably, even upon the fattest places of the providence. And he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. And he shall scatter among them prey and spoil, and riches, yea, and he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Yea, they that fed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. And both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. Very important, this passage that we're getting into now. We're coming up into the period of time that more interests us. We're going to pick up our story and start looking at it more in depth again. Antiochus, you have coming down from the area of the north, and he is going to come into Egypt and conquer. But when he gets down into Egypt, there's a problem. Egypt's now made a pact with a new group of people that are rising on the scene. If we remember the story from Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue, you start out with Babylon as the head. You come to the arms, you have the Medes and the Persians, then you have Greece, and then you have that last great state in the statue. And this is what we're talking about here. In comes the new force to be reckoned with, Rome, the Empire of Rome, and it begins to take land and it begins to influence. And so Antiochus, when he came down from the land of the north to come into Egypt, he gets down there and finds that they are being backed up by Rome. And really, one of the phrases that we use more commonly comes from that area, as far as we know, when the Roman senator stands before Antiochus and draws a line basically around him and says, look, you've got a choice. If you come against Egypt, we've made a pact of peace with Egypt, and you will be coming against us, the entire Roman Empire. And so what I need is for you to decide. See this line I'm drawing around you. You need to decide right now, before you do anything else, are you going to come against Egypt or not? And of course, Antiochus needed time to think about it. But with the line around him, the senator said, if you step out of this line without giving me your answer, I'm going to take that as an affirmative that you're coming against us. And so Antiochus was upset. He decided, okay, I'm not going to come against Egypt. He turns and he heads back, and he goes against Israel. Comes into Jerusalem, desecrates the temple, and as we're going to see here in the next few verses, verse 29 through 32, at the time appointed he shall return and come towards the south, this is coming down to attack once again Egypt. But it shall not be as the former or as the latter. For the ships of Chittim, the Roman ships, have come down, and shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved, and return, and have indignation against the holy covenant. So Antiochus comes down, he's going to attack Egypt. He can't. He returns, but he's mad. And, sometimes when we're really mad and we can't do something we really want to do, we take out our anger on something else. And so he does. He comes back and he takes out his indignation against God's people in Israel. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsook the holy covenant. And so he's going to come back and he's going to talk with some of the leadership even in Israel, and he's going to start making some changes, some very, very important changes that are going to change drastically the temple worship. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. So as he's coming back up, he comes back to the temple. He's actually got the nerve to go into the temple, taking a pig, which according to the law of Moses, was an unclean animal, takes a pig into God's temple and sacrifices it on the altar. Effectively shuts down the temple for 3 years. And in this period, from when the Israelites returned with Nehemiah after Babylon till now, basically the temple has always been functioning. Not necessarily functioning completely the way God intended it to, but it's always been functioning. Here, the temple shut down for 2 to 3 years, and nothing can happen because of the desecration that was happened there. Verse 32, and such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries, but the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. And so as he comes and he does this, he leaves some troops there in Israel. And the purpose of these troops that he's leaving is just to create a reign of terror, bothering people, riling people up. But of course, in the effort to do that, we can see here in this image, the map, the king of the north. This is the area of Antioch, and he came down to the area of Egypt, Ptolemy, and of course the Romans came in to help him. And he went in and did that sacrifice. And what this did was it set the footwork for another very important thing to happen. And let's read on in verse 33 to 36. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many. There is a group of people rising up. Yet they shall fall by the sword, by flame, by captivity, and by spoil many days. Now when they shall fall, they shall be helpened with a little help. But many shall cleave to them with flatteries. And so during this period of time, you really have the group which later on we come to know in the New Testament as the Pharisees. During this period of time, they're still a fairly conservative group. They're still a very responsible group. And they're literally fighting for the temple, fighting for what they understand as good and right under the law of Moses and under the law of God. And there is some help that comes in here, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. Let's finish up 35. And some of them of understanding shall fall to try them and to purge and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for the time appointed. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. And so what you had in this period of time, you've got Antiochus leaves his troops down there. They're creating a reign of terror. And you've got this man named Judas. And his family, they are known as the Maccabeans. They rise up, and you have what is called the Maccabean Revolt. They chase out everyone clean and sanctify the temple. And of course, if you've read a little bit about Hanukkah, the story behind that is that they didn't have enough oil to light the lamps and keep them burning for the period of time that they needed to keep them burning. but they lit the lamps anyway, and supposedly the lamps continued to burn throughout the entire period of time that they were supposed to be burning, even though they didn't have more oil to put in with the lamps to replenish it. And so you have the Maccabean Revolt, which was a Jewish rebellion lasting from 167 to 160 before the Common Era, led by the Maccabees against the Seleucid, which is that other kingdom to the north, empire, and the Hellenistic influence on Jewish life. And so behind the Maccabean Revolt were also this group that would be later on better known as the Pharisees. And of course, they're going to be changing and over time and to become what we then find in the New Testament, which is Pharisees that are not necessarily conservative to the degree that they used to be. They've now changed quite a bit. But in this period of time, they're still out to defend what is good and right under the law of Moses. And the Maccabean Revolt didn't last long. It kind of was something that was big and strong in the beginning, and then later kind of just flatlined and tapered off and started to disappear. And behind Judah Maccabee, a couple of his brothers came in, not nearly with the amount of desire behind him to clean things up, and Israel begins to slip again, leaning towards the Hellenistic way of life, the Greekan way of life. But also, there's a new player in town, the Romans, and there are those that are leaning towards Rome. And of course, it said there, a king will rise up. And we have this king. And the king shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. And so you have this king that's rising up, Herod. Herod the Great, he's been called. For a time, he wasn't a king, but through a lot of battles and efforts, he was finally named king of the Jews by the Romans. Herod, also known as Herod the Great, Herod the First was a Roman client king of Judah. In other words, they put him in power. He ruled under them. He had the management of the governmental side of things. He did not have the management of weapons, military, and things of that nature. He was referred to as the Herodian. This was referred to as the Herodian kingdom. The history of his legacy has polarized opinion, as he is known for his colossal building projects throughout Judea. And so a lot of people disliked him. He was not a Jew. And, of course, the more conservative of the Jewish people believed that the only one who could be king of the Jews had to come from the lineage of David himself. And here was Herod, who was not a Jew. Technically, he actually come from the Edomites, and so did his family. But anyway, continue into verse 37 to 40. So what we're going to have now in the next few verses is this play between Herod and Rome. And this is really what our passages are going to be talking about, these two powers that are now on the stage in Israel. It says in 37, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces. And a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver, and with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. And so you still have, aside from the fact that you've got some Roman presence here, and the Romans that have given a little bit of power to Herod, you still have this battle between the Ptolemies, the kingdom of the south in Egypt, and also the Seleucians to the north, the kingdom of Syria and over into that area. And Antiochus and his descendants come in and attempt to take, and actually do take from Herod for a while, the area of Judea and whatnot. And Herod is forced to go back to the Romans and say, look, I'm really the best man for the job here. If you would just come down and help me take all this back, I'll make sure you guys get all the praise and honor. And so the Romans say, great, we'll help you. And they come back and they help clean out all the enemies and help Herod take back. And that's when they actually officially name him in that period of time king of the Jews. And so Herod, as it talks about here, Herod actually did some very great building projects, and I don't have all of them here. I just have some of the more important ones that pertain to Jerusalem in particular, and also pertain to the Temple Mount. And so on this side we have the fort of Antonium, which was built just off the side of the second temple that Herod the Great built. And of course, if you get into the writings of Josephus and read about what this temple that Herod built looks like, they call it the second temple, but really the second temple was rebuilt or was started when Nehemiah and the people left Babylon. And so what Herod did was really he added to that and made it look quite a bit more fantastic. According to Josephus, there was a lot of gold and ornateness built into this new temple. And to protect this temple, of course, Herod built this entire edifice off to the side that held and supported some few Roman legions, but also was more of an upper scale market, really for the more wealthier people. And he really decked it out and put a lot of effort and money into it. He also built what is called the Herodium, which is supposedly his last fortress, also supposedly where he was buried. According to more recent archaeology, it was a huge castle on top of a man-made mountain that was really decked out lavishly by him. Again, another place that's quite fantastic in the same general vicinity is, of course, the mountain of Masada. He built this Roman stronghold, this Roman fortress up on top of this mountain, basically, again, decking it out with all the lavish things you could imagine in life. And also, all of these, while he's building them, he's dedicating them to the Roman emperor and doing them for his own fame and glory, but also for Rome's fame and glory. This is the purpose behind this. And of course, all three of these edifices are basically within a very tight area there in God's holy land. And as it says in verse 41, he shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand. And so this is talking about the power of Rome coming in. Rome's picking up the pieces here with Herod, and now leaving a more specific military presence. But it says, these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab and the children and the chief of the children of Ammon. And he shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. And we know in this period of time, of course, there's some unrest in Rome itself, but Rome begins to consolidate its efforts and take back what it's about to lose. In verse 43, but he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. And so as Rome's expanding, they're going to take a fair chunk of Egypt. They're going to be right on the doorsteps of Libya, looking at Egypt on your map, that's to the west, and the Ethiopians, which is to the south. And verse 44, but tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy, and utterly to make away many. And we know that Rome heads up into Europe, into the Gallic Wars. And verse 45, and he shall plant the tabernacle of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. And so, and I think in verse 45, I think that could be talking about Herod the Great again, and where he built up his fortress. But here in verse 41 it says, and he shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand. Even Edom and Moab and the children the chief of the children of Ammon. And here on the left, you can see a map of the period of time that we're talking about. This is about 30 AC to 30 BC to 14 AD. This is the period of time that we're talking about with Herod the Great and Christ. And I kind of got amplified here, just the Judean area. You can see the light green, mint green here. This is Roman secondarily controlled areas, not specifically under Roman power, but a secondarily controlled area. And you can see the dark green over here, Egyptian area, right up to the border of Libya, also going south to the borders of Ethiopia in this time. And this is land that is being gained during this period of time up into the Gaelic area with the Gaelic Wars. But it tells us that Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon escape. And of course, here in the far right, you see another image with different colored pieces on the map. This yellow is the Edomite territory. The kind of a tannish khaki brown is the Moabite territory. This purple territory is the Ammonite area. You can see it's right around the Dead Sea. And so if you come down here and find that same area here, you can see this area at this time is not at all under Roman control. This is a separate area. And so that's important to note. At this moment in history, they did not have power over these territories. And so here we have the castle, the Herodium, the last place of King Herod, and supposedly also where he was buried. It says he shall plant his tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. And we have here the Dead Sea, we have on the other side the Mediterranean, and basically just a little south of Jerusalem we have the Herodium, and it's planted directly just about in between the two seas. And we can see the ruins as archaeologists have it today. Here is a drawing, an artist's idea of probably what this looked like during its glory days. And this is the end of Herod. And the important of this is it brings us right up into Christ. Because if we remember the story that we did in chapter 9 on the 70 weeks, Herod, Christ is actually born prior to Herod's death. So Christ is being born as an infant into this period of time. And as the story goes, according to the scripture, Herod, out of anger, he gets worked up and bothered because of tidings from the east, which would have been the wise men coming in and telling him about this new king that's being born, and tidings of the north. And of course we know he sent troops north to try to destroy the king of the Jews, Jesus, and kills all the children 2 years and younger. But we know that Joseph and Mary had already been warned and had fled to Egypt during this period of time. And so this is the very period that we're talking about, and it's approximately when Herod dies also. And so that's basically chapter 11 in a nutshell. I hope this helps you a little bit in your studies. Again, I'm not saying it's a perfect interpretation of this chapter. It's just, at this point in my own studies, the best that I have to offer in regards to what all these things mean. I really do think they're pointing to the Roman period and Christ's coming. I don't think there's anything in chapter 11 that's pointing towards the end times, the second coming of Christ, although we do know that historically history repeats itself. And so, again, I wouldn't be surprised to see things in this chapter repeating from time to time throughout history. But I really do think that chapter 11 really focuses on the coming of Christ, the Messiah, and basically building from Daniel's period up to the Roman period and the birth of the Savior. Thank you. Hope you have a wonderful day. God bless.